Hello. Thank you for joining us. My name is Farida Badamosi. I am a Black American woman with brown skin. I'm wearing gold earrings that look kind of like balls. I am wearing a multicolored top, which has different geometric shapes with pink and white and different colors. In my background, I have a window, I have a beige wall, and then a black kind of leathery thing. I have locks, black locks, and I'm very excited to have you join us for this conversation. Um, on behalf of Barnard College and Women in Hollywood, it is my honor to welcome you to the 11th Annual Athena Film Festival. This festival is dedicated to celebrating the stories of bold, courageous women leaders and the filmmakers who bring these stories to life. Thank you for joining us. As I mentioned, my name is Frida. I'm one of the programmers at Athena Film Festival. This year's festival would not be possible without the support of our dedicated sponsors. Please join me in thanking Athena's founding sponsor, the Artemis Rising Foundation, and its CEO and founder, Regina K. Scully, whose visionary leadership makes our work possible. A special thank you as well to our premier level sponsor, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, which shares our commitment to showcasing stories of women in science. To all of our sponsors, whose names you will see before each film and event, thank you for your commitment to challenging our culture to be more inclusive and inspiring audiences in the process. This year, we wanted to create something new and exciting to bring to our audience. So we came up with these 8 different program areas that we believe react and respond to our current moment. This conversation is part of our Imagining a New Future program area. In this program area, we recognize that this time has all of us thinking about what the new normal will be. But it does not need to be a worry, but rather an opportunity for something better. The future is wide open. What will it look like? This panel is called Black Feminist Future, Reconceiving Freedom for Collective Power and Justice. And we think that it's very much an important part of having conversations about imagining a new future, essentially looking at different frameworks in which we can imagine a new normal for ourselves. I'm pleased to welcome our moderator, Miriam, who will be moderating this conversation and will introduce our panelists. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much, Farida. My name is Miriam Bale, and I have the luck to be the moderator of this conversation. I'm the artistic director of the Indie Memphis Film Festival in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm also a film critic and film programmer at many different other institutions. I have black glasses, and I have brown corduroy blazer and a burgundy turtleneck and sort of shoulder length 3B hair, and I have a white background. And I will now introduce you to our panelists, starting with Valerie Complex.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Athena, for having me. My name is Valerie Complex. I'm dark-skinned woman. My glasses are like brown and gold. I have shoulder-length locks, and I'm wearing a red shirt that says New York City. My background is a gray wall and 2 white doors. Not terribly interesting. I'm a Pisces, and I love movies. I'm a film critic and writer, and it's what I enjoy. Did I miss anything?
No, that was beautiful.
Okay. Thanks.
And now all of our panelists will be introducing themselves. And now Dr. Mecca Jamila Sullivan.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, Athena. Thank you, Farida. I'm excited about this conversation. I'm Mecca. I'm assistant professor of literatures at English at Bryn Mawr College and the author of the short story collection, Blue Talk and Love. And I write a lot about Black feminist literature, Black feminist culture. In my background, there's some Black feminist literature that I love. Ntozake Shange's For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow's Enough, Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, and Audre Lorde's Zami. And then there's a window with bright light. It's a bright day.
And now our final panelist in Chicago, I believe, Ashley O'Shea.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Ashley O'Shea. I am a Black woman with twist and a black hat that says array and an overexposed background. I am a filmmaker, documentarian, cinematographer based in Chicago. Have been working here for about 5 years now. I'm very glad that the snow is finally melting. And yeah, I also moonlight as a DJ, and I don't really mention that. So that's the other side of my life. But yeah.
Those were great introductions. I learned a lot. I think Mecca started us with introducing some of her uh, Black feminist texts, and which is a wonderful way to start the conversation. So I'll ask all of you, and this could be nonfiction, this could be fiction, this could be films, this could be music, as is often the case with Black feminist history, some of the strongest areas. So I'd like to ask you all, Ashley, can you get us started since you're familiar with all those areas?
Oh no, I'm not as well read as I think the other panelists are, but I'll try. Um, I will say a very pivotal text in the creation and process of unapologetic was Ella Baker and the Black Freedom Movement by Barbara Ransby. I, my film, which focuses on two young Black queer women within the movement for Black lives. When I began the project, I knew that I wanted to explore areas of activism and movement that had not been present in my formal education. And so as I was talking to my advisory board and other folks, everyone was really encouraging me to check out that text. And Barbara Ransby is based here at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And it was just a great read in history about the life of Ella Baker, and um, it had a thoroughness and a truth to it that we really tried to pull out in Unapologetic, and really I think encapsulated Ella Baker as a three-dimensional person, and gave breath to the civil rights movement, and other Black social movements that I didn't know I was missing, that I had been getting fed this regurgitated activism, and from a very small perspective. So that was definitely one that was instrumental in the creation of this film. And then I'll also say, no, I'm not gonna say that. Never mind.
Oh my God, you can't do that.
I'm not gonna say that. No,
you can't do that.
Okay, I'll think of something else. I'll also say, can I bring up music? Is that a thing I can mention as something that is important to the breadth of it? Chicago has a really amazing artist scene and music scene, and we try to definitely encapsulate that in the film as well. So there's an artist here by the name of No Name, who is a rapper, and also has been going through a really amazing growth journey, on in terms of her understanding of Blackness and social movement. And so I always just feel like she's been authentic to her process, and very honest in terms of what she does or doesn't know, or I feel like she kind of has a little bit of self-deprecation like I do. So that was definitely she was definitely one of the artists that I constantly kind of went back to. She has a song that's with Aaron Allen Kane and Kenya that talks about basically how dare you kind of downplay yourself when your ancestors have done so much to get you here. And so I can't remember the name of the song now, but if I do, I'll say it. And that was really important for me too in the process.
That's perfect. That's great. And can you just tell us, for people who are newly discovering all of your work, can you tell us a little bit more about Unapologetic?
Yes, so Unapologetic is my directorial debut. It's a feature-length documentary that follows Janae and Bella, who are two young Black queer women. abolitionist leaders here in the movement for Black Lives over the course of about 4.5 years as they organize around two of the police killings that happened at the hands of the Chicago Police Department.
It was wonderful. I really recommend it to everyone. And yeah, definitely. Valerie, can you tell us some of your key Black feminist texts in your life?
Hopefully I get to see Ashley's film. It sounds really great. I've become really interested in the Black female gaze, and I know Audre Lorde talks a little bit about it, and Angela Davis talks a little bit about it. I haven't been reading as much as I should be recently. I've been going through a lot of different things and just haven't made time for it, unfortunately. One thing that I have been, so I can't really speak to the text thing, and I feel kind of embarrassed, but I promise I will read more. I think what I have become fascinated with is the portrayal of Black womanhood in independent cinema, particularly. And that's why I've been doing a lot of research and reading up on the Black gaze recently. And specifically is because I'm interested in this history there, going from just another girl in the IRT to premature and beyond, and what that has looked like over the years and what it means for the future. I believe independent cinema has been better for seeing a full range of personality types of Black women as opposed to mainstream cinema, because it's something that I used to buy into with mainstream cinema, and the shroud has been pulled off my from my eyes and everything, and now I've just become interested in this notion that because independent cinema is so much freer, at least in my opinion, those portrayals and what that looks like. One of the books that changed my life was the Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. I read it when I was like 16 years old and going through this color struck phase, and it really helped open my eyes. And I read it every once in a while, but I haven't read it recently. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's great. No, that's perfect. And honestly, I was asking text broadly. So just another girl on the IRT is totally important for this. And I appreciate you mentioning it. And yeah, that's a great start. And
Thank you.
No, of course. And Mecca, you already mentioned some things that are on your wall. You can mention them again. And I would love to know, actually related to what Valerie just said, I know that something you've worked in is the Poetics of Difference. Mm-hmm. And can you talk about some sort of extra literary feminist texts that you find valuable outside of writing, and how you might respond to, and tell us a little bit more about the Poetics of Difference, how we can look at the way people speak and communicate outside of formal literature.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I love this conversation already. So the Poetics of Difference is the term that I think through in a book that I have coming out called The Poetics of Difference, Queer Feminist Forms in the African Diaspora. And it speaks just to what you were saying, Valerie, and what this whole conversation has been, how often we're encouraged to imagine Black womanhood and the sort of lives of Black queer people as monolithic, right? And so the images that we often see and the images that circulate most frequently are not created by us, and deny the kind of complexity of ourselves, our lives, our desires, our identities, really. And so in this book, I'm making the argument that Black feminist literature and literary expression, and I think about literature broadly, but that Black feminist literature has always defied genre in order to articulate those complexities. So one great example is Shange's Korea poem. I'm tempted to reach back there and grab it. It's the most colorful one, right? With the woman with the kind of color, the yellow head wrap that you see in the background. She invents this genre called the Korea poem, right? To articulate all kinds of things about Black women's genders, about Black women's sexualities, but also the kind of unnamed nuances of identity and experience, desire, feeling, sensuality, fantasy, right? All of these things that can't quite be articulated in just choreography or just poetry, for example. And so for that reason, I think about text as being beyond just kind of literary genres. So yeah, absolutely. One of the most kind of fun, exciting sections of the book, well, exciting for me to write at least, was about Missy Elliott's Work It, right? And the argument I make there is that she sort of asks us to think differently about language, right? Think about language in reverse, this idea of a kind of Black feminist gaze, but it's sonic, it's auditory. So, I mean, I think, in the study of Black feminist literature, we have to think beyond just the printed text and the written text, and absolutely film, music. You could make the argument that fashion, right, could be sort of perceived as Black feminist literary text. And these are the things that I'm excited about. So I'll just add Missy to my list of Black feminist thinkers that I really admire.
And I think about, I'm sorry, did I cut you off?
No, go ahead, Valerie.
Okay, I was going to say, when you talk about the difference and everything, I think about this interview that I saw with Julie Dash, and she was talking about Daughters of the Dust and how she formed a new way to tell the story. And I was fascinated by that because she chose not to, because, there's a hero's journey and there's a 3-act structure or whatever. And she just threw that out the window and said, I'm going to adapt something from the diaspora and use it to tell use it to sort of build this, to world build and create, the structure for the Daughters of the Dust. And when you talk about like that difference, it just makes me think of, because I've been really rediscovering independent cinema, especially in the Black space with Black women. And it just makes me think about how much more creative Black women can be when they feel like they're not being restricted by races, misogynoir, pretty much. And so it just, your point, Mecca, Dr. Sullivan, just reminded me of that interview.
Yeah, it's funny. I've been thinking about Daughters of the Dust a lot. I wanted to include it in the book, and the book was already like 380 pages, and I was like, okay, gotta stop. But yeah, I think absolutely, and I really appreciate what you were saying earlier about how independent cinema allows that kind of freedom, right? And a lot of, I think about Shange, a lot of the folks who I work on, their artistic vision began before there was a kind of mass market apparatus for them, right? And that that creativity is something that I think any of us who've grown up in communities of Black women or Black queer people, we know that creativity is like, it brims from us, it brims from our communities. And it's about, I think, finding ways to kind of tap into that and create structures to get that creativity out, right? Because the idea that our lives are, again, monolithic, limited, finite, stereotypical, it's a lie, and it's an externally imposed lie within our communities. We know it's not true, and our art is speaking to that. So yeah, to your point about independent cinema, I mean, I really admire what y'all do, and I think it's important to Black feminist literature as well.
And I love, again, that you mentioned Missy early on in this idea of imagining a future, to flip it and reverse it. Like, that's often what we have to do. And Valerie mentioned, there's not only sometimes when we're talking about Black feminism, do we need new stories, but sometimes we need new syntax, new language, new form, maybe even new working structures, and all of that. Actually, Ashley, I'd love to ask you, you made Unapologetic with a very predominantly female crew, isn't that right? Can you talk about that decision and that experience?
Yes. Well, I knew from the jump of Unapologetic that I've always been really mindful of gays, even when I was a film student. Just thinking about the lens through which I was looking through. Going to a predominantly white institution, I went to Northwestern, and I was very bored and uninterested in a lot of what my fellow students were making, and so I think that kind of just gave me the courage and the forthrightness to approach everything that I do from my unique lens. And so when it came to Unapologetic, especially in the film being so much about the Black queer feminist lens, I knew that I wanted this film to feel like young Black people made it. I wanted to feel like young Black women made it and queer folks made it. And I just leaned entirely into that. So, my producer is a Black woman, editor is a Black man. A lot of the folks that assisted and worked on the production team were Black women and queer folks. And so I think that brought an authenticity and a freshness to what we see on screen, in a way that can't be carried by someone that comes from a different identity. And I also kind of did it as a kind of, not experimentation, but I kind of wanted to prove this point that young Black people are talented and capable. There was a lot of um, uphill battle, whether consciously or subconsciously, when we were trying to get funding for the film or support for the film. Kind of like people wanted you to prove yourself before they would invest in you, and it's kind of like other people, like white men, they don't have to kind of work through that barrier. And so, despite the difficulty of that and how long it took us to really get our stride, I wanted to prove a point that young Black people are capable and can make something that has a widespread and influence, and we don't need the white gaze to be able to do that.
That's wonderful. And Valerie and Mecca, you're working in, smaller teams, often with yourselves and maybe an editor. Have you found a different experience in your writing work with working with, well, first of all, let me ask you, have either of you ever worked with a Black woman editor?
Recently, very recently, I had the chance to work with Nicole Therese Dutton, who was recently named editor of the Kenyon Review. And she had reached out, for some work, and we worked together on a novel excerpt that ended up not making it into the novel, actually. So I think It's Only Life Will Be as this piece in the Kenyon Review. And yeah, I mean, it's a great question because it makes you really think, and it's been rare. But that was a wonderful editorial experience. And the piece was very much about race and gentrification and sort of what Black freedom looks like. So it was wonderful to think through some of those ideas with her.
That's great. And Valerie?
I think only once. You really got me thinking with the question. And I'm like, it's not something that I didn't notice. It's I don't even know how to explain it, because it's embarrassing, the fact that, you can't come in contact with people who look like you, who understand your work. But only once, and that was when I was writing for Black Girl Nerds at the time. And, everybody there was Black or brown. And that's the only time I can recall. It's usually been white men who have difficulty understanding where I'm coming from. I haven't had a lot of pushback, thankfully, but it's been mostly white and male. And a lot of them don't understand that that literature is changing, and the way films are critiqued is changing. That especially Black women can sort of approach films with a duality. Like, I can address the technical aspects of the film and everything, but I can address the social issues as well. Just because you don't, I mean, that's fine, but nobody's going to your outlet to read what you got to say. They want to know what the people on the street got to say. They want to know what you got to say, Miriam. They want to know what I have to say, what Ashley has to say, what Meg has. They want to know what y'all have to say. And I don't think that they're tapped into that, because it's so insular, and they're insecure about losing their jobs. And the system is so jacked and broken. I've grown weary of working within it. I enjoy like writing on my own. I'm working on a book, and coming up with my own stories and stuff like that. And that's been the goal for me, is not having these people attach their ideas to my stories, but sort of creating my own in a sense. And it just, that sort of drew me more into independent cinema, the stuff that people ignore just because famous people aren't in it, or things like that. Because I always find that there's better performances. There's a there's a spectrum of different types of lives that we see. And when you talked about, Ashley, the Black feminist queer gaze, it's a very specific thing that maybe someone who is in the diaspora may not be able to identify with all of it, but they'll be able to find something within it that speaks to them. Whereas we have the just regular female gaze, that doesn't speak to everybody. But with Black women, we have specific instances that we all share collectively, or that we can all share collectively because of culture and things like that. So I've tried to stay away from, focusing on that aspect of cinema and getting more into what I'm enjoying. I hope that answered the question. I was rambling on. Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and it brought up a new question. I think, are you finding that, obviously the internet and social media has lots of drawbacks, but have you found that, let's say in the last 5 years, that you've had more community with Black women this is for all of you, across the diaspora? Do you feel like that have you found that, or is that something that you are still maybe seeking?
I think I've found that with the small group of people who are international, who are going through the same exact things that I'm going through. They just may speak another language, or they may be in another country. It's exhausting to hear all of the stories and how we were all going through this. Like, it felt like collective progress from 2018 to 2020. Film festivals were sponsoring. Underrepresented critics and things of that nature. And then the pandemic hit and everybody's just threw their hands up and was like, we're all, and I don't blame people. People were trying to keep their jobs, funds go belly up and stuff like that. But it just felt like a regression. But it was good to be able to fall back on this community that we created so that we could figure out solutions to help each other out and help ourselves.
That's great. And what about you, Ashley and Mecca?
Yeah, it was really interesting actually this past summer with the the unrest that we were seeing around the movement for Black Lives and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Just this morning, I was talking to someone about kind of the institutional kind of pivot that happened after that kind of came abreast, and how everyone was trying to like align very quickly to be like, hey, like we care about Black people, so that we didn't take our work away. And so that really just showed me like how valuable we are to the system, and how it really just like cannot exist without our perspective. Um, and then in terms of like kind of the universality of this specific gaze, I think that there, like for me, there just like has not been enough of it. There's never been enough of it, and I've been surrounded by Black women my entire life, whether that's in my home, in the church, in community space. And so I knew there was kind of just like an understanding of like the power and the universality to that experience. It's not all exactly the same, but there we kind of exist within a range in terms of that identity. So it's been really interesting, like when I watched the film with Black women versus other identity groups, because there's just kind of like a shared. I just really enjoy watching Black women. It's more enjoyable, and it feels like it's at home with the people that it's supposed to be at home with. And I don't think there's always a conversation about audience and who you're targeting when you put out a piece of work. And so for me, I've always been like, I didn't make this film for white people or white audience. I made it for young Black people and Black women and queer folks. And if someone else has an issue with that, that's fine. I have an issue with a lot of films that don't center our gaze. So I'm really grateful when I get to experience it with that group, because there's like you can feel them seeing themselves, and that's really important to the experience.
That's so great. You both just brought up so much with the way identity can be a trend for the gatekeepers, and the way yeah, it can be like a niche genre for these same gatekeepers. But the question for you, Mecca, about sort of an international African diaspora community.
Yeah. So I feel like I want to answer that question, but I also want to jump into this conversation about sort of the gaze and universality. Harriet Mullen has this quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't remember the exact language, but the exact language is gorgeous, but the paraphrase would be, I believe that my perspective as a Black woman is no less representative of humanity than any other. And I just love that because it articulates the specificity that you're mentioning, Valerie, right? The idea that like our perspectives bring, there's a whole lot that's left out of whatever the dominant vision of femininity or womanhood or what have you, right? That is missing from our perspectives. But centering our perspectives is inherently valid and valuable and in fact necessary for anybody who wants to think about humanity, right? And in fact, in some ways, it's arguably one of the more valid, valuable, necessary perspectives because it's one of the ones that's always written out, right? So like, what does it mean to center, the worldview of a film, of a novel, of a TV show within that perspective that's often silenced? And I think it's really in keeping with, the kind of core concepts of Black feminism, the Combahee River Collective, right? The idea that only when Black women are free will freedom actually be a reality, I think as artists, we do that when we choose the gaze that we want to center. As a novelist, I think about point of view often, right? Like, what does it mean to center a fat Black queer girl's point of view for a novel? She's out there, articulating her identity and engaging with the whole world. We see the whole world, and it's just as valid as anybody else's world, but it's different because we see it through her perspective. I'm going to try and pivot to the diaspora question. I guess like globality is something, the technology question is really interesting because it's so hard to think about this question without thinking about COVID and quarantine and all the kind of community and connection that has been lost in the past year. So I guess it's helpful to think back before then. And I think, yeah, absolutely. The research that I do, this book is about African diaspora culture and experience. So for the book, I did a whole bunch of travel and got to connect with a lot of Black queer people and Black feminist communities across the globe. And, it's undeniable that social media has helped me maintain those connections, in a way that I I wish that I could be there, right? Like I want to be in DR. I want to be in South Africa. I want to be there now. But it's true that I think we're able to maintain some of those ties and connections and be, in each other's lives in a way that probably wouldn't have been possible had we been locked down for a year 10 years ago, which I do appreciate.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the gaze conversation too, and thinking about so yeah, let's keep going on the gaze conversation, but getting into some more sort of tricky territory, especially in film. We've seen things recently that have star Black people, let's say Black women. Often it's Black men, but let's say that stars Black people, but that is directed or written by a non-Black person, often by a white person. What do you find that reading gaze in those works is tricky? What are some of your thoughts on that? Especially to you first, Valerie, since you're the film critic.
I think when I started like film criticism, in 2013, just sort of casually, gaze wasn't something I had considered. I hadn't even heard the term. But now it's extremely important. I'm not going to connect with every film, but if you want me to take it seriously, if this is something that you're putting out and you want people to be serious with it, and it's about Black women, then you've got to, put the effort in discovering that sort of gaze. I mean, there are some directors who have done a fairly decent job. If you look at The Color Purple, for example, but recently, like the biggest example I think about is Antebellum, and I don't know what happened there. But it was co-directed and written by a queer couple, both male, Black and white. They're an interracial couple. And I was just stunned at the level of disconnection. And it isn't always like, the Black female gaze is so specific that Black men miss the mark too. And a lot of it has to do with patriarchy and other things. It's just, but Antebellum was like the biggest example, because I just was like, how could they be so disconnected from women and culture to create these caricatures of slavery cosplay? I didn't know. I mean, I don't know what was going on in that film, and I still am discovering what it is, but there's no real examination of the gaze there. What is it like to be a Black woman going through this issue? We don't see enough through her eyes, because the film is trying to scare us, or it's trying to go over the top and trying to shock you, instead of trying to tell the story through one woman and what she's sort of seeing. The gaze is extremely important, because I don't think I can connect to characters with in films without it now. I am always looking for that little touch of everything. Are we sticking with the women? Are we sticking with the female characters in it? What are we seeing? How do they see each other? Because I do understand that the gaze can also be aggressive as well. Like I saw Passing at Sundance, which is another example. Passing was okay. The performances were great, but it missed a lot of that gaze. It didn't go far enough into what we see as colorism, and that could be due to the director's limited knowledge of what that looks like. And also, but what she did do, which I thought was really interesting, was create this sort of aggressive female gaze, where women look at each other with passion and desire, but it's on the negative spectrum. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I thought that was interesting, because there was a bit of tension and antagonism between the two of them. But the gaze was there. It just, the context wasn't. So, sometimes I find myself compartmentalizing and just being like, well, they did that right, good for them. Which I'm going to stop doing, because no, if you're going to create a story, you're going to talk about Black women, then you talk about it. Don't, pussyfoot around the issue. Just talk about it, or just don't create it.
That's so good.
Can I jump in on this really quick?
Please.
Valerie, I'm nervous for you to watch my film. I hope it lives up to your standards.
No, documentaries have been great across the board for the last 2 years. So I have every faith in you that your documentary is great, because these documentaries have been slaying feature film for the last 2 years. So I'm looking forward to it, actually.
I look forward to hearing what you think. I think two really great examples of this as well. There was a lot of uproar in the community when Malcolm and Marie came out recently, by Sam Levinson, and kind of like the toxic energy of that film aside, there was a lot of criticism in how they were portraying Zendaya as a mixed Black woman, as a Black woman. Saying like, why is she cooking him like Kraft mac and cheese at like 2 a.m. when like a Black, I would just give you some cereal. Like, I'm not about to. Why would we eat that? And kind of what Valerie was saying, like there's these small like details and delicacies that I think you can recognize from a Black woman director or a male versus female director, that people are starting to pick up on more. And I think a good example of that is actually an action film called The Old Guard that came out this past summer. Gina Prince Bythewood. She did, in my opinion, like I didn't have any context in terms of like that comic and kind of the whole universe behind it, but I think, everybody was kind of going on about Charlize Theron and her star power that she brought to it, but she also had Kiki Lane, who's an up and comer. And I felt like the way that she dealt with her Black womanhood in that film, and just like having a Black woman like action like protagonist superhero was like, that's not something that you see a lot, like directed by a Black woman. And that kind of further just expands like the market and the range, because it's showing that Black women can direct action films. Like, let us just cast it the way that we want to and write it and direct it the way that we want. Because I watched that film with a mixed group of men and women, like in terms of race, and everybody was into it. Like it can be palatable for the wider market while still being specific to a certain experience.
That's great. And Mecca, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested because this is not, my field, but I can approach this as a kind of consumer and as a kind of critic of culture in general. Like, I appreciate actually what you're saying about the power to kind of make those creative decisions. Because I think about this as, on one hand, you've got the, sort of the quality of the art that's produced, but then of course there's the economic, valence, and then the kind of social, cultural capital of who gets to be involved in the production of a film, right? And I think, of course, I think Spielberg's The Color Purple is the canonical classic text, and that will always be the case, and I think, there's so many reasons, right, why that is going to be a Black feminist staple forever. But I think it absolutely is the outlier in terms of a film that really was able to articulate a Black queer feminist experience in a way that does center that gaze. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's an adaptation, and that the novel gives you all of those things. And if you're really trying to sort of be true to the novel, you have to center Celie. Whereas I think that's not the case with some other films, that are, sort of, that don't center the gaze that perhaps they are supposed to be centering. And I think about The Last Black Man in San Francisco as an example for me of a film that I went and I hadn't read, or I didn't know much about the film at all, but within 5 minutes, I could tell that there was something about the gaze that was not intended for me, that my perspective wasn't being centered. And that's an aesthetic thing, right? Like, as a viewer, they lost me. The film lost me. And I just, the whole rest of the time, I was able to watch it and got the themes, and there were moments that were interesting, and like, it's no shade to the film. There were some great performances, but there's also that aesthetic thing of sort of like, what viewers do you care about? And if you care about Black people in San Francisco, I'm Harlemite, but if that's the gaze that you're interested in, why not spend the money and, sort of offer the resources to a team of people who can create that film? It's going to sound like I'm throwing a whole bunch of shade on that film, but that's just one example, But,
no, I agree. I just agree. I've written about it. I had the same experience where I was like, I didn't know who made it, and I thought, why is he doing this weird sub Wes Anderson thing? And then I find out it was a white guy. I'm like, oh, that's what they do. That makes sense. They often will do that, and it made more sense. No, all of those. That was all super valuable. We're talking about the future, and I want to get to the future and the sort of imagination we need for the future. But I also want to talk about the past. A quote that I often think of is something Anita Hill said back in 1991, or about the trial the confirmation hearing for Clarence Thomas, who's now on the Supreme Court, and a hearing that was overseen by our current president, Joe Biden. And in that hearing, she was talking about the sexual harassment she had experienced from the Black Clarence Thomas. And what she said was that people think he had a race and I had a gender. And that was back in 1991. Yet, unfortunately, I think that thinking is still with us. Have there been moments in your life, or challenges, especially creatively, where you're made to think in that divided terms, like either a race or a gender?
Oh man, that one slapped me in the face because I'm working on a pilot and I'm working on a graphic novel, and my writing partner is a Black male, and I told him straight up, I was like, "You're my shield because I know what's coming." So, as a Black woman, there's always barriers to creation, whether it's in front, in front of the camera, behind the camera, wherever you are, there's always some kind of barriers. But being a male has privilege, no matter what race. That's just how the world works. It's unfortunate that Black women are put, considered the bottom, whatever the hell that means. But I told him specifically, I was like, I just feel more comfortable, having, well, he's also a great writer, but I just have I'm just more comfortable with you being in the picture. And I found myself making myself smaller and shrinking myself and being like, oh yeah, just deal with him. And I had to take a long, hard look in the mirror, like, wait a minute, like, these are my projects. I have conceptualized and built the world, but I'm letting him talk to people because I'm afraid that I'm going to be. So I had to regroup and start over. And, and he's been cool with it either way. But I'm like, you and I are equals. We will do the things together. And that's it. If they don't want to talk to me, then they don't want to talk to either of us. It's period. So that's sort of how that has sort of influenced me recently.
I appreciate that so much. I appreciate you sharing that. Does that quote resonate for anything with you, Ashley or Mecca?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it was certainly something. I know I keep talking about unapologetic, but it is what it is. It was certainly something in the creation of unapologetic that we grapple with a lot. Like having a all Black women directing, producing team is very. It comes with a lot of weight to it, and even when we were approaching funders and institutions about supporting the project, we had to be very intentional about like how we were presenting like the project, who it was being helmed by, and really feeling a responsibility to the community that I was portraying, in the way that they were so forthright and how they represented themselves. Like every time that I wanted to like kind of diminish that, I had to like try to push back against it. And as a first time filmmaker, there's constantly like there's people always coming at you from every side trying to like kind of tell you the best path to take, or like taking like equity versus like grants and how you like fund the film. So I also tried to be very intentional, like in how I was being mentored around that. So like one of the EPs on the project is Yvonne Welbin, who has, done great work in literature and film, for many, many years. And it was just always interesting when I kind of, when I would go to her for like feedback and guidance versus, maybe one of my white counterparts. Especially when it came to money. I mean, if you've met Yvonne, she's very forthright. And even as I've been like exploring, hopping on new projects and directing, she's been very clear about me naming a price and sticking to it and stopping. Like because I worked for free on Unapologetic for like a year and a half. And so she was just like, "You don't work for free anymore," and I listened to that. And then another quick point I'll make is just so I also work as a cinematographer, in Chicago, and if you work in the technical side of filmmaking, like there's just very little representation by women, especially women of color, in terms of like you're below the line, like cinematographers, gaffers, anybody that's like working on the tech side. there's just been a lack of, I think, training and mentorship in terms of like specifically that group. And so that was kind of something I was doing in tandem with working on unapologetic, was trying to figure out how to remain authentic to my identity while working in this very like white male dominant space, or even male dominant space, and being like literally being, when you're being asked to be the DP and you are at the helm of the ship, like a lot of times coming into spaces where people are trying to influence your vision or one up your vision in ways that you sometimes don't even realize. And so I had to start being really aware and intentional of like what I was bringing into a space and sticking with that, despite kind of the dynamics that happen, because it's not, a lot of times it's not overt. It feels like someone's like helping you or guiding you a certain way. But when you kind of take a step back, you realize that they're really kind of pushing it to the aesthetic that they want. And yeah, that's something that has definitely I've had to grow with over time, and I'm still growing in as I continue that practice.
Thank you so much for that. And Mecca?
Yeah, I really relate to what both of you are saying. Especially the kind of the ways in which we have to grow and develop strategies and relationships that help us navigate these structures and systems that want to sort of bifurcate us or have us sort of choose one part of our identities and one part of our creative practice over another. And, you know, yeah, I have similar experiences, similar stories. And I think for me, it's often been about spaces, a space where I'll enter and, you know, thinking that I'm bringing my whole self, because I am, but then realizing that I'm being encouraged to kind of like quiet down this part or quiet down that part. You know, I should also add that as a queer woman and as a larger woman, right? So, you know, there are all of these sort of aspects of my identity and my personality that I see as absolutely indispensable, interconnected, intersecting, we could say, right? That like in certain spaces, it may seem as though there's not room for our whole selves. And actually, your point about mentoring, I think, is really interesting, because I think that for me, you know, I've always been sort of seeking that kind of mentorship and have found it, you know, fortunately in a lot of places. But really, a lot of that didn't happen until like more recent stages in my career. And so for me, literature was the place where I looked for that kind of guidance, you know. And to me, Audre Lorde is sort of the king, queen, emperor, high priest, priestess of this discourse, this part of the conversation, because she's constantly insisting on naming all of the parts of her identity that she brings to the table, right? So she's like, you know, and it'll switch from one essay to another, but she'll say, I'm a, you know, Black lesbian cancer survivor, a mother of two, a member of an interracial couple. And then in another essay, she'll say, I'm a Black feminist poet, lesbian, you know, woman born blind with, you know, who, you know, with, you know, the kind of, she'll talk about her disability. She's ambidextrous, right? Born ambidextrous. So that refusal, honestly, to just prioritize one aspect of her identity, and the insistence on like making sentences that run over with the kind of fullness of her identity, and like making you read it and making you love reading it, you know, like making you kind of get into it. That I think is something that has been a model for me. And so fortunately, because my work is writing, I've been able to create spaces for myself where I don't have to come up against that impulse so frequently. But of course, it's always there, you know? And I feel fortunate that I've been able to create a lane for myself. It's like, that's what I do. That's what I write about. So at least at this point, everybody knows, right? That like, that's who I am.
Creating a lane is so important. Yeah. Were you about to say something, Valerie? No. Okay. Well, I want to ask, sort of related to that, what we've been talking about, is there, not to overemphasize the negative, but from the negative we get to the positive, about was there a time in your life when you realized the limits of white feminism? Or moment? Or, I mean, that's a broad question. I could also ask, well, yeah, I'll start there. Was there a moment or a time in your life when you realized the limits of white feminism?
Last year.
Oh, last year.
I would say 2019 to 2020 was when I was really seeing, not that I, believed in the pink pussy hat and, the march stuff. I didn't, but I was able to really see it for myself when I was engulfed within it, and realizing that people were, because I'm verified on Twitter, whatever, and I got, followers and stuff. But I found a lot of them using that in the name of feminism. And then when I turned around to try to get things from them, it was like it almost seemed like I was begging. And I was like, I have no business doing this. What is going on? And I had to really come to my senses and be like, okay, well, that is what am I doing trying to not even necessarily be a part of this space, but trying to reason with that energy, because there's no reasoning with that. It's set in its ways. And if you don't like it, then you're being a negative Nancy, or you're just being the angry Black woman. Well, yes, I am angry and I am Black. So what else do you want? But they don't want that. Not like that. Not we like your feminism, but not like that. And it was really a turning point. And I literally because I was losing focus on what my goal was when I started writing in the first place. And then when I came sort of out of it, I was like, I don't have to cater to these people at all. And it has freed up some mental health space in my head. So now I can worry about something else. But so like within the last year and a half or two has been a big, huge epiphany. And I'm so glad I had it, then, because I'm mature enough for it now to move forward the way I want to.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Do either of you have something to add to that? It's fine if you don't. I know it's a tricky subject.
I just feel like it's gonna sound, I'm gonna be messy, and I'm trying not to be messy.
That sounds totally fair. Let me switch the topic.
mean, I can briefly oh God, okay, how would I word this? I think certainly in the film space there are a lot of spaces that are dominated by the white feminist gaze. In speaking, I guess, specifically to Chicago, so I'm part of a collective called the Mescla Media Collective that is a gathering for women and non-binary folks of color in film in Chicago. And so, that even our organization itself, I think, was birthed out of kind of that lack of perspective that we were seeing in terms of the support organizations that have been here in the city. I think a lot of times white women have access to certain funding structures or certain institutions in a way that women of color do not. And I'm like, I'm not gonna name any names, but I've been in particular all women spaces before, where it's very clear they want to connect with me as a woman. But if I start to bring, like you were saying, Valerie, if I start to bring in the racism and the classism and everything else, they get nervous and have even felt really like pigeonholed in terms of like my experience and how they talk about it. Talking about the broader industry kind of taking this pivot towards people of color in film and feeling like they don't have a place in it or they're limited in it. And it's always just kind of like rubbed me a weird way. So yeah, I guess that's what I'll say on it. It's something that I certainly don't feel like I can't challenge people on. But I think that a lot of times, white women are perpetuating the patriarchy, and kind of like the dominant narrative, and really using their gender as like a platform to catapult this liberal perspective. But when it comes time to be about it, they're not really about it. That's all I'll say.
I appreciate that. And Becca, do you have anything to add?
I mean, I think, it's been said. Yeah, I think we all have stories. And I guess the only thing, is I appreciate, Valerie, what you're saying about mental health, right? And I think actually it's in there with what you're saying too, that like we have to figure out ways to live our lives and do our work that we don't, drive ourselves crazy and be, trying to, I mean, and I say crazy in a kind of colloquial Black feminist literary sense, right? That we don't damage ourselves trying to, correct these folks who, are not interested in really learning, and at the end of the day, I think also, Valerie, what you said about being able to say no, right? Like, I actually don't want to be in this conversation with you. I don't want to have this, I don't want to be in this space, which of course is a power, an exercising of a kind of power. But I think it's sometimes crucial. It has been for me, at least, because it's exhausting to convince people that their feminism is not in fact feminism if it's not anti-racist and queer-phobic and anti-fat-phobic and anti-classist and anti-transphobic. If they don't want to hear that, sometimes it for me, it comes down to then I can't be in community with you, and I'll take whatever loss that might bring.
It's just like the people, on social media with the BLM in their profile, and then you try to talk to them and they're like, oh, reverse racism. And you're like, so you got the Black Lives Matter and the Black tile and everything, and you're telling me what is and what isn't real about racism toward Black people. Okay, cool. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of performance out there. People are acting better on social media than they are in their own films. Like it's a lot of it's a lot of there's so much performance. It becomes overwhelming. People who make promises at the beginning disappear suddenly. You can't get in touch with them. You can't do anything. There are whole organizations that are dedicated to, women's issues. But then when you have meetings, you got to tell the white women in the room to pass the mic and be quiet because it's time to let the people of color talk about their issues. It's been a massive headache to see it, to be a part of it. And, to be in spaces where they just want you there for the aesthetic so they can pat themselves on the back and say, look, we did it. And then, when you walk out the door, they don't want nothing to do with you. I think, and also, to your point, Mecca, about these different things like fat phobia and sexism and stuff like that, and sort of defining what that is for this generation, right? Because you use words like intersectionality, and they get excited, like, yes, intersectionality, and it's like, do you know what that really means? Because you don't practice it. So what are you getting excited for? And it's just a lot of learning that needs to go on. But I don't need people demanding education from me. Oh, well, you should, if you want this, then you should give me this. No, if you want this, you could use Google and the books and the library and, whatever. And, I don't mind, giving people resources and links and stuff, but you got to do your own research. I have my own things to do. During the day, I'm not a teacher. I don't even like teaching, but I have to do it. I don't even like teaching, but I have to do it. And, but most people are not looking, they're not looking for education. They just want to argue and be right. And I'm so done with that. I feel like years have come off my face and skin because I don't deal with that shit anymore. Oh, excuse me.
Can I say something? I don't know if it's going to be quick.
Of course, please.
To your point, even like that last point about people like public facing wanting to present a certain thing and then it being completely different on the flip side. Like, to me, this whole summer when institutions and companies were trying to align with the BLM movement, I was like, this is complete BS. Because I've either worked with your company or know people that have worked at your company that have not had this experience. And I think a lot of them were envisioning it as this like 3 to 6 month operation where they can correct literally years and years of institutional sexism and racism. And it's like, no, you're gonna have to dig and do some work. It's gonna take probably years to unpack it. Like, it's a commitment. And I was even part of conversations with institutions here in Chicago, where we gathered just as the folks that like work, that the people of color that like work with the institution, and we were straight up like, we are not trying to do the work like for y'all. Like, we we gathered and told them our grievances and kind of like the corrective steps we saw towards it. But we were like, at the end of the day, this is on white people to figure out what is wrong. And it was interesting because I think it was even hard for our, like, us in community to stand in that, because we're so used to it. We're so used to doing the heavy lift for white people. And yeah, it's just like, that is not what I'm on this earth to do. Like, I think that institutions really struggle with like how they can keep employing this like black aesthetic, this black feminist aesthetic, without really doing the work. And it's like, you're gonna keep coming up against these fissures, and you're every freaking year you're gonna put out another stupid statement saying you align with BLM, and it still will be the same. And I'll be slightly optimistic in that I think last summer there was probably, I have started to see shifts, but I guess I'm just saying, like, I'm recognizing that, you know, I'm pulling back from doing that lift because I know it's a multi-year unlearning experience that I have put the time, even as a Black woman, I've had to put in the time in to unlearn the harmful institutional systems that I've been taught in school and other places. So if I had to take all that time, you could definitely, you know, go to the library and buy some books by Audre Lorde and Alice Walker. It's really easy. Just go. It's not really easy, but like, it's not. Just make it happen. Start a reading group with your white friends and make it happen. Like, I don't need to handhold you because I've done it already and I'm tired.
That's perfect. Well, I'm going to ask one last question. And so in this question, I need you to just kind of go in this imaginative exercise with me and imagine that the future is now, and the ideal utopian future is now. And you look around, what does centering Black feminism look like in your field, in your industry? I know it's a big question. We take a moment to think, but we've talked about a lot of these specifics. So, who wants to jump in on this one?
Okay, I'm gonna try, but I think the gaze is not. If I'm talking about cinema, I think the gaze is not in taking characters who were formerly white and giving them to Black actors. And I'm not going to say like create a new thing, but there are all these facets of life that film covers for white people. But I know there were Black people in the Wild West on the frontier. Where are those stories? We need more of those. And we need more women, Black women, telling those kinds of stories, ones that connect to different facets of life and different eras of life, that are not slavery and that are not Jim Crow. Not that those stories aren't valid. They're valid. They're important, you know, in terms of cinema and education. But we have lived other lives too, you know. And I want to see that. I want to see more queer stories written and directed by Black women and supported by other Black women. I just want to see more of a collective community of Black women creating the things that they want to see. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing like a train robbery Western of the 19th century with Black women in it. Yeah, it's the same. You know, we've seen that format before, but the Black the Black female gaze is going to give you a completely different perspective on a story that's pretty formulaic. And that's why I think, like, you know, Black women specifically are important to any type of storytelling, because it opens up the door to a world that only we No. And it, you know, the whole goes deeper if you exist at certain intersections. Like I'm a lesbian and I'm a military veteran. You know, that is something that is specific to me. And it's something that I would find interesting, you know, like Ashley's film, you know, we haven't seen activism from the queer perspective yet. At least I have not yet. So we need stuff like that. We need books like what Dr. Sullivan is doing. We need more of that across the board. I hope I summed that up. I didn't want to ramble, so.
Agreed. Mecca or Ashley?
I'll jump in. I want to go to Valerie's future. And I think in that future, I also imagine it as a space in which we can all say that we have had phenomenal experiences working with editors like us, working with gaffers like us, working with agents like us, working with, such that like we are able to have the creative freedom, the economic freedom, the kind of social connection and community that we need to really build what we want to build creatively and politically.
That's beautiful. And you, Ashley?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I really want to see Black women and femmes and trans folks and queer folks in these positions of influence, to be the shapers of culture in industry. Something that's been so interesting and pivotal in my journey as a filmmaker has been going through distribution with Unapologetic, because I realized that the gatekeepers of culture and media, that's what shapes our literal film, TV, music landscape, and it's just something I hadn't been exposed to, and so even in the way that we've been, working to sell the film, the feedback, the yeses and the nos and the maybes that we've gotten. Some have just been surprising, and not necessarily aligned with the group or the company that we were going to. Like, it would seem like a perfect fit. Then you realize who the gatekeeper is, and it's like, if that person doesn't like it, they can kind of make the decision that even if the larger distributor, like, it would be good for them. So I would definitely, like, in terms of distribution and exhibition of films, I think that is there's a huge lack of representation in terms of race and gender there. And I also, in my future, there is amazing mentorship and support. There's a lot of reaching back. I'm at where I am today because I started in a program in high school when I was living in Indianapolis that was nurturing young Black voices. And I just think about that all the time and how pivotal that was, and even me getting to film school and coming to Chicago. So I think we need more spaces like that where we can just give young people, young girls, just the chance to like make art, and like it might be bad and weird and strange, like all my stuff was, but like now I have a film in my 20s, and that's awesome. So I definitely imagine that in the future. And in the future, my film is also playing at shameless plug. It's just playing at the Athena Film Festival from, I believe, the 13th through the 16th of March. So hopefully, I think we created the film as a living archive for the future of the movement for people to look back on, and so I hope that it inspires the future of activism, of organizing. And it encourages people to that they can live in their authenticity while they're still striving for these changes.
I wish we lived in a country that valued and fostered the arts. Because I know, like in certain countries in Europe, you want to make a movie, you send in a grant and you get state funding. That sounds amazing, but that's not what they're interested in here. They're interested in performing, but they're just not interested in, putting the money where it belongs. But, plenty of tanks and jets and stuff. Yay.
Well, I just want to thank all of you so much. And let's just another plug for Unapologetic, the 13th through the 16th. So you can have a chance to see it, Valerie, and we all can. And I want
Yes,
to
I'm
thank.
really interested in your if you want to write a review, let me know. We can make it happen.
We're going to have to, yeah, regroup discussion. I just want to thank all of my panelists, Valerie, Mecca, Ashley. It's been so nice to be in community with you, and this conversation has been elucidating and a delight. So thank you to all my panelists. And thank you so much to Athena and Farida and Melissa. Thank you so much for hosting this. And thanks to all of you for watching. Bye.